Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Segura, can you please state and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
Henry Segura, Henry Segura.
And you have 2 prior convictions for misdemeanors involving fraud or dishonesty?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just for clarity's sake, you're not a convicted felon, though, so you're you're lawfully allowed to possess firearms, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's something that you would ordinarily do on jobs when you travel all over and do your welding jobs, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute. Let's start back in 2010. What were you doing for a living back then?
I was a welder.
Okay. How long have you been?
Keep your voice up, Mr. Segura. That's fine.
Okay.
Put the microphone up too high. We're gonna get a squeal back, but
Okay.
get a little closer if you can.
All right.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. You said you were working as a welder back then?
Yes, sir.
How long had you been doing that?
About 15 years or so, I guess.
Okay. And were you an employee of a specific company, or were you like an independent contractor?
I work with different companies.
Okay. So would you travel around or stay in one place?
We traveled from state to state.
Okay. So you're never in one place very long?
No, sir.
Okay. What about that, when you were in Minnesota, back when you were initially arrested on the case, what were you doing there?
I was working at I think it was a sand plant. They was recycling sand.
Mm-hmm.
I was a welder on that job.
Okay. Was it at all unique for you to be in Minnesota, Washington, California, wherever?
No, I've traveled from Maine, Washington State, New York, Texas, North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, all over the state.
Okay. And how did you get work exactly?
Mostly by word of mouth, sometimes through the internet.
Okay. And were you required to have any licenses or certifications in order to do those jobs?
No, sir.
Okay. And that includes when you were doing jobs in the state of Florida, correct?
No, sir. No, I didn't need a license. I just took a welding test when I got to the job, and they certified me once I passed the welding test and a drug test.
Okay. Now, were you married back in 2010?
Yes, sir.
And who were you married to?
Malika Segura.
And how long had y'all been married at that point?
I think about 10 years.
And did you and Malika have any children together?
Yes, sir.
Who were those?
Malachi, Henry Segura III, and Javante Segura, but he had passed away like a year before.
Jalik, you mean had passed away?
I mean Javante, yeah. I mean Jalik, yeah.
Had passed away before Javante?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, kind of explain for us, if you can, what the dynamic in your marriage had been with Malika, both prior to Jalik's death, your premature son, and then following Jalik's death.
I had got caught cheating a lot. I've had a couple of kids outside of my marriage. It made our marriage go up and down a whole lot. I made a bunch of promises that I wouldn't cheat anymore. Once our son Jalik died, I made a promise to her that I wouldn't cheat on her anymore, and I tried to not get caught. I actually started cheating back after a few months or so that I made that promise to her, but I tried harder to not get caught, I guess you could say.
And why was that an event that would trigger you specifically to want to change your behavior as it related to cheating on your wife?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what was it about Jalik passing that made you specifically think that it was appropriate for you to change your behavior relative to cheating on Malika?
I don't know. At first, I made a promise. I made a promise to God first. I was working in Crystal River, and Malika called me and said that the doctors called and said that we had to get all the family together because Jalik might not make it through the night. I was on the road coming home. I had a girl out of town with me at the time, as a matter of fact. I got her in the car with me. We came down to Tallahassee. We went to the hospital. And on the way, I told God, I said, if you let my son make it through the night, I won't cheat on my wife again. And he ended up making it through the night. He lived to be 11 months old. And I believe when he was 8 to 9 months old is when I started back cheating on my wife.
Okay. And how did he pass away?
He died in his sleep due to breathing complications.
Was that something that had been an issue since he was born prematurely?
Yes, sir. His lungs were not fully developed.
Okay. Let me shift gears a little bit and ask you about Brandy. How did you meet her?
I met her at a gas station in Tallahassee.
And how did that interaction proceed? How was it that you guys started talking to each other and seeing each other ultimately?
Well, I met her at a gas station across from the fairgrounds, and I got a phone number. We started talking on the phone occasionally at night. We had a sexual encounter, and we ended up moving in with each other after that.
You're still married to Malika during that time when you and Brandy lived together, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so how did that work?
Me and Malika had just moved back to Tallahassee from Sanford, and we were looking for a house. And in the process of looking for a house, she was living with her mother in Gaston County in Quincy, and I was supposed to be living with mine here in Tallahassee. Instead of me staying at my mother's house every night, I was spending most nights at Brandy's house.
Okay. Did Brandy have the twins at that time?
Yes, sir. They were around 2 at the time when I met her.
Tanai and Tamaya, right?
Yes.
Okay. How long did you and Brandy stay together?
We stayed together. Javante was like 4 or 5 months when I left and started. About 18 months total, probably altogether.
Okay. And
From before Javante was born up until when he was born.
We can't have that. All right, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry, Mr. Segura. You were talking about.
It was probably 18 months total from the time I moved in with her up until Javante was like 4 or 5 months.
So Javante was born during the time that you and Brandy were together?
Yes.
Okay. How long had you all been together when Brandy got pregnant?
8 or 9 months.
And when Javante was born, you believed he was your son?
Yes. Yeah, I was at the hospital with her. I signed a birth certificate. I was the whole nine.
Okay. How, if at all, did you provide for Javante during the time that you were still with Brandy?
Whenever me and Brandy was together, I brought Pampers, brought clothes. I stayed home with him, watched him when I could, whenever I wasn't working. Just whatever it was the father was supposed to do at the time, I was there.
Okay. The twins were approximately how old when Javante was born?
I believe they were around 3.
Okay. And what was your relationship with the twins?
They were more like my kids than Javante because I spent more time with them before he was born.
Okay.
I potty trained them. When I first met her, they were wearing pull-ups. I got them out of pull-ups and potty trained them so they were wearing panties. I cooked for them. I brought them to school. Picked them up whenever the van didn't bring them home. I was just being a father figure.
Okay. And how long did you remain with Brandy after Javante was born?
Like I say, till he was like 4 or 5 months.
And what happened at that point?
At that point, I started back working out of town, and our relationship kind of faltered then because I think I went to Colorado. I stayed in Colorado for like 5 or 6 months, and that's when me and her stopped communicating as much.
You and Brandy stopped communicating?
Yes.
Okay. At some point, did there arise a question about whether Javante was in fact your son?
Yes, sir.
And how did that come up?
That came up mostly on weekends because, I would spend most nights at her house, but on the weekends, me and my wife was looking for a house. So if I told Brandy I was coming home or I was coming back or then I wouldn't make it back, she'd get upset and be like, well, you know what, you just spend time with your family, Javante got another daddy anyway, just something, little sly remarks like that.
Okay. So that's when you started questioning whether he was actually your son?
Yes. And
so how did your relationship, if there was any after that, proceed with Javante?
I kind of fell back from Brandy, so to speak. So I didn't really spend as much time with Javante or the twins like I used to. After those incidents that me and Brandy were having together, most of our encounters were just sexual. Like I would come by, we'd have sex, and
And why did you let your relationship with Javante, I don't know what the right way to describe it is, but kind of lapse? Why weren't you involved with him like you were with your other kids after that?
It was kind of hard. I was always gone. She was, lived on one side of town. My wife was on one side of town, and I couldn't be there as much as I wanted to, or as much as I should have been. And once I came back in town from working, I had so much stuff at home I had to try to catch up on. So it was kind of hard for me to spend a whole lot of time over at Brandy's, and I just really didn't have time.
Okay. At some point after, well, let me clarify this first, I guess. All the stuff that you've been talking about, you living with Brandy and her becoming pregnant with Javante, that was all prior to Jalik's passing?
Yes. When Jalik passed, we had already brought the house.
Okay. And so, was Malika aware of your relationship with Brandy, and was she aware of Javante?
Yes, sir. At some point, she did find out about Brandy and Javante.
Okay. That wasn't the first time you got caught cheating?
No, sir.
That had been a problem throughout your marriage?
Yes, sir. Probably from the first year of our marriage.
And that's your main vice, right? You make no bones about that. You were
That's
a cheater, a philanderer, all
most
that.
Most people smoke crack, do heroin. That's my drug of choice. I don't drink, I don't smoke, do any drugs. That was my drug of choice. I'm not proud of it, but that's what I did.
Okay. At some point after that, by which I mean at some point after you and Brandy separated and you and Malika got a house here in Tallahassee, did child support for Javante become an issue?
Yes, sir.
And how did that go?
Okay, so first of all, I went down to the, what was it? It was on North Monroe across from the Tallahassee Mall at the time. I went down there and signed the paperwork to put myself on child support. At one point, I was giving Brandy cash money. Every time I go over there, she needs some money. So I told her, I'm not giving you no more money. You keep saying Javante's not mine. I'm not giving you no more money. So that's why I put myself on child support. Now, once I put myself on child support, she wouldn't fill the paper. She wouldn't sign the paper stating to go forward with the child support. So she went back and I guess she went back and did the paperwork, and I didn't know she did it. I don't know. But I went up there twice and filled it out myself to put myself on child support so that I can stop giving her the cash that I was giving her and then the money orders.
Now, do you know with certainty who filed what first?
I know I'm positive I filed it first, 2 times.
Okay. Why did you have to file 2 times?
Because the first time she told me she wasn't finna sign no paperwork. I need to just take care of Javante like I've been doing. And I said, no, I'm putting myself on child support. So she wouldn't sign it. So I went back and I did the paperwork again. Matter of fact, the reason I went back the second time is because she told the first paperwork I gave her up, she received up.
Okay. Did the issue of whether you were going to formally pay child support remain an issue with Brandy, or were you guys ever able to solve the issue on your own?
I'm gonna say it remained an issue, but we were able to solve it at the same time. Cause I can tell her, hey, look, I'm gonna give you some money on the first. Or I'll give you some money on the, whenever I go to this next job.
Mm-hmm.
And she would listen to me, she'd go for it, and then that'll buy me some time or whatever. So it went either way with her.
Okay.
She'd get mad when I tell her I'm coming to do X, Y, and Z. When I didn't do it, then she'd get real upset. So I just calm her back down.
Okay. So at some point you started receiving letters from the Department of Financial Services about child support, a formal child support order being set up. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were you at all familiar with that process?
No.
The process by which the Department of Financial Services administers payment of child support and requires payment of child support?
Yes, sir. I was very familiar with it. For I had a daughter at the time that was like 4 or 5, and my daughter was in Orlando, and that's one of the reasons why we moved back to Tallahassee, because I had a child in Orlando and my wife moved back here. But during the child support proceedings and with my daughter, I went to jail. I got my driver's license suspended. I had to pay a bunch of money to get out of jail. before they would let to go towards the child support. And I met this guy who was telling me, he said, look, all you have to do is you pay X amount of dollars towards whatever they're telling you have to pay, and they won't suspend your license, and they won't put you in jail. You don't have to worry about anything.
And so that process was with your daughter, Janae, correct?
Yes, sir.
Janae's mother is Tamika Hawkins?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so Tamika had gone through the exact same process that you were starting to describe for Brandy, right?
Yes, sir.
That would have been back in 2006?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did at some point Tamika, I guess this is implicit from your prior description, but did Tamika at some point get an actual child support judgment against you?
Yes, sir.
And what was the amount roughly of that child support judgment?
It was in the 20s. It was 27,000 or more, somewhere around that area.
Basically the same
It was
amount.
the same exact thing because Janae was 3 years old at the time.
Okay. Now, you've been here the whole time. You heard testimony about the various consequences that can come into play due to non-payment of child support. You just started to describe a couple of those. Mm-hmm. At some point, Tamika did in fact have you put in jail for failure to pay, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were able to solve that problem?
Yes, sir.
By making partial payment?
Yes, sir.
And it was the same thing with your driver's license?
Yes, sir.
What about your ability to work? Did the child support judgment obtained by Tamika impact your ability to continue welding?
No, sir. It didn't because I worked from state to state. Sometimes I worked under the table. I stayed working. I just didn't, do the main jobs that I wanted to do probably. Like some jobs in Crystal River area where, it would be easier for the state of Florida to garnish your wages or something like that.
So you had basically figured out a way around having to worry about your paycheck being garnished, right?
Yes.
Did Tamika ever obtain a tax lien such that if you had any tax refund owed at the end of the year that it would be intercepted by the state of Florida and given to Tamika?
Yes, sir. She gets my taxes. If I file for taxes right now, she gets them.
Okay. That judgment is still in place now?
Yes, sir. It's still in place.
So you were already prohibited from being able to travel internationally prior to this child support judgment, Brandy's child support judgment being imposed, correct?
Oh, yes, sir.
Had you at any point prior to Brandy obtaining a child support judgment against you attempted to travel internationally by obtaining a passport?
No, actually my sister got married in the Bahamas, and I tried to get a passport to go there, and I couldn't.
When was that?
I don't remember what year it was. It was before all this happened, way before all
Prior
this happened.
Prior to the murders?
Yeah, it was way before all this happened.
Okay. So you were already aware that you couldn't get a passport and travel
yes, sir.
Because of the child support judgment from
Yes.
Tamika?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What about, well, I guess let me ask you this. So at some point you get notified that there's going to be a second child support judgment against you, right?
Yes, sir.
What was your plan for dealing with that?
With Brandy and Javante, it was a little bit different from when I had a judgment against me with Tamika. With Brandy and Javante, I lived in the house with her. I was with her when Javante was born. I had receipts of the money orders when I gave her cash for the money with the money orders. I had receipts for clothes and all the clothes I brought him, Pampers I brought him. So that would have proved and showed to the judge that I was in his life from the day he was born up until the 3 years when she put me on the child support when the paperwork came through. So that would have reduced the $20,000 arrears that they tried to put on me drastically.
And how far did it reduce it? Didn't it go down to 8,000 or 9,000 or so?
No, with Tamika it did, yes. But I'm saying with Brandy, I didn't never had a chance to go to court.
Okay. Did you plan to at some point go to court?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What would you have hoped to accomplish by going to court?
Like I said, I would have gotten it all reduced because I had the money order receipts, I had receipts for Pampers, I had receipts for all the clothes and stuff I had brought. I even paid her rent a couple of times. It was real cheap because she was on Section 8, but I even had receipts when I paid that.
Did you have any knowledge that because Brandy was Section 8, regardless of whether she pushed the issue of child support, DFS was still going to enforce the order? Did you know about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. As that process proceeded, as Brandy's child support judgment process proceeded, did you take steps to deal with that, or had you not gotten to that point?
Repeat that.
Like, had you done anything besides going up there twice to a DFS office and filing documentation? Had you done anything beyond that to attempt to reduce the lien, reduce the payments, anything like that?
No, sir.
Okay, that was just your plan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Was there any difference in the way that you planned to deal with Brandy's judgment as opposed to Tamika's judgment?
Yes, like I said, I was dealing to put in a petition to the court and bring in all of my receipts and all of this other information that I had that would bring the arrears down from the $20,000 that they tried to say I owed to whatever amount it would be.
So you had documentation that you believe could potentially result in Brandy's judgment being reduced?
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay, but you hadn't gotten around to raising that issue prior to her murder?
Right.
Okay. I mean, how concerned were you about Brandy's child support judgment once you found out about it?
Not concerned at all. That was my whole plan. I was looking forward to it coming. Like I said, I haven't even had a chance to make the first payment before her and Javante were killed.
Okay. What kind of financial situation were you in around the time that Brandy got that child support judgment against you?
I really wasn't in a good financial statement. I was out of work for about a month or so. I had just got shot, and so I was kind of behind on bills and stuff.
Okay. So did you plan to address Brandy's child support judgment once you got back up on your feet and started working regularly and all that again?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, with Tamika, after she got you put in jail the one time and had your license suspended, your driver's license suspended, did you ever get sent back to jail or get your driver's license resuspended, or had you figured out how to work around that?
No, sir. Like I said, once you just make a partial payment on whatever they're trying to, whatever they're attempting to get out of you, then they won't suspend your license. You won't have to go back to jail. So, like Tamika, for instance, I think I had to pay $130 a week. Some weeks I didn't pay the whole $130, so I paid partial, and that was good enough.
Okay, so after you were initially put in custody and your driver's license was suspended, you were able to navigate the system and avoid those consequences popping back up, even when you weren't paying the amount that you were supposed to pay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's talk about how things started back up with Brandy. We saw text messages from the week of the murder where she was talking about having you put in jail and all that. Were those text messages sent to you from Brandy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was your plan for dealing with those?
Like I said, I had receipts. I had all this information that would, once I went to court, I could have showed it to the judge, and it would have been proof that,
Well, I should be more...
Oh, no, okay, I got you talking about,
Sorry.
So she wouldn't throw me in jail.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to Brandy specifically, we've talked about what you plan to do legally about the child support judgment. Were you, I guess let me ask this first, were you and Brandy still talking at that time?
We wasn't in a relationship. We had like a sexual relationship mostly, but we didn't really talk a whole lot.
But it had been a while since y'all hooked up, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as of the time of the murders, save the incident that happened on the day of the murder, you and Brandy had not been in a continuous sexual relationship, right?
We had a sexual relationship, but it wasn't continuous. It was off and on. Like, if I was to go out of town to work, sometimes I'd stop by her house. Sometimes if I was on the way home from work, I'd stop by her house. So it wasn't no steady thing, but it was off and on.
Okay. Now, in the year and a half or so after Jalik passed away, had Malika ever caught you cheating with Brandy or anybody else?
No, sir.
So as far as Malika was aware, at that point, you were still honoring your promise that you made following Jalik's passing?
Yes.
Okay. But you were cheating on her at that time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Hadn't been caught yet?
No, sir.
Were you still trying to make your marriage with Malika work at that point?
At the point, right when my son Jalik died, yes.
Okay. And you continued to do so?
Yes.
I mean, at least to the extent that you hid your affairs and didn't do it kind of out
I
loud.
actually tried to make my marriage work all the way up until I was in Minnesota working.
What happened when you were in Minnesota?
I rekindled a relationship with a friend of mine from school, from back in middle school.
And you decided at that point you wanted to be with her?
Yes.
So we're talking about now fall of 2011, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
So a year after the murders?
Yes.
You hadn't been charged yet at that point, correct?
Oh, no, sir.
Okay. So that phone call we heard, was that after you were taken into custody in Minnesota?
Yes, sir.